Okay, this is Final Solution video 2. We're going to pick up on, I don't know, near the end of halfway through page 5, Arrival in Auschwitz. This should be pretty much halfway. Narration. Auschwitz has been a Polish military barrack, but in 1940 it was turned into a concentration camp. 2 years later, gas chambers and furnaces for killing purposes were added at a section of the camp called Birkenau. By this time, Hitler was frantically rounding up Jews from across Europe. Auschwitz, because it was on a major railroad line between Krakow in Poland and Vienna in Austria. By the way, sometimes you'll see Krakow spelled with 2 Ks instead of 2 Cs. It's just because Polish isn't a perfect translation from English. Don't let that throw you off. It's the same place. Oh, okay. Vienna in Austria and was where most were sent. Okay, so Jews coming from Poland or Austria, most of them were sent to Auschwitz. All right, was where most were sent day and night. SEAL trains arrived from Holland, France, Australia. That's how you say this one. You pretend like the Z is an H. So you say it Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Italy, and other European countries. Auschwitz grew to encompass 40 square miles. That's big, space-wise. The Wiesels arrived in 1944 on a train from Hungary. One of the family survived, a son named Eli. He wrote a book called Night that tells what happened to him. Here's some of it. And I'm sure many of you, if not all of you sophomores, have read Night or will read Night this school year. This is just a little piece of it, though. The cherished objects we had brought with us thus far were left behind in the train. With them, at last, are illusions. Every 2 yards or so, an SS man held his Tommy gun, trained on us. Hand in hand, we followed the crowd. An SS non-commissioned officer came to meet us. A truncheon in his hand, he gave the order. Men to the left, women to the right. 8 words spoken quietly, indifferently, without emotion. 8 short, simple words. Yet, that was the moment when I parted from my mother. I had not had time to think, but already I felt the pressure of my father's hand. We were alone. Sabora held mother's hand. I saw them disappear into I should say the distance, not my. My mother was stroking sister's fine hair as though to protect her, while I walked on with my father and the other men. I did not know that in that place, at that moment, I was parting from my mother and Sabora forever. I went on walking. My father held onto my hand. Behind me, an old man fell to the ground. Near him was an SS man, putting his revolver back in its holster. My hand shifted to my father's own arm. I had one thought, not to lose him, not to be left alone. SS officers gave the order. Form fives! Commotion. At all costs, we must keep together. Here, kid. How old are you? It's one of the prisoners who asked me this. I cannot see his face, but his voice was tense and weary. I'm not quite 15 yet. No, 18. But I'm not. I said 15. Fool. Listen to what I said. And he questioned my father, who replied 50. The other grew more furious than ever. No, not 50, 40. Understand? 18 and 40. He disappeared into the right shadows. A second man came up, spitting oaths at us. What have you come here for, you sons of bitches? What are you doing here, eh? Someone dared to answer. What do you think? Do you suppose we've come here for our pleasure? Think we asked to come? A little more and the man would have killed him. You shut your trap, you filthy swine, or I'll squash you right now. You'd have done better to hang to yourself where you were than to come here. Didn't you know what was in store for you at Auschwitz? Haven't you heard about it in 1944? No, we had not heard. No one had told us. Describe what happened to the Wiesel family upon arrival at Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, the Wiesel family separated forever. Who wanted to survive with Eli for a night? Suppose you see someone beating up someone else, really beating her up. She's going to end up in the hospital or maybe dead. Talking, kicking them on the ground, blood, kind of beating up. What do? This isn't your fight. You try to break it up, you almost certainly will get slugged. Should you call the police? Should you stay out of it? If someone killed, it won't be your fault. Or will it? Are we responsible for others? Do you agree that he who permits evil commits evil? I want you to answer this one on your own. Then we'll continue. I'll do the same. In 1939, 20,000 children, all under 14, were in danger in Germany. Hitler wished to get rid of them. He was willing to let them leave the country. Many were Jewish, some were not. Quakers, Jews, Catholics, and members of other American church groups agreed to take responsibility for them. It would not cost the government any money. Surely America would accept them. This is the land of promise, the land built on a spirit of generosity, the land that from the days of the pilgrims had been a place of refuge for the persecuted of other nations. Those who had founded this nation and written its constitution had been clear about it. Although they were much alike, white, male Protestant, and of English descent, the founders didn't limit the nation to people like themselves. They were unselfish in spirit and wise. They believed they were creating something new on earth, a generous nation that would find strength in diversity, a nation that would take peoples from all over the world and allow them to become a new people, an American people, more varied in its roots than any before it. The founders offered the gift of citizenship, not just to their kinsmen, not just to the strong or the handsome or the rich, but fully and equally to all who came here to live. The nation grew and its citizens understood what was intended. Under the Statue of Liberty, they carved the words, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." Men, women, and children from all over the world came to this promised land. Many were refugees, people fleeing tyranny and persecution. Okay. One or more examples of fairness and tolerance in U.S. history. It'd be better if you had your own examples for that. But if you can't think of any, you could use mine. Of course, the children Hitler was threatening with death would be welcome in America, or would they? There was another tradition here. It was not the tradition of Jefferson, Washington, and Madison. It was a spirit of greed and selfishness. It was that selfish spirit that had caused Alien and Sedition Acts to be passed soon after the nation was founded. It was that spirit that had caused men to rise in Congress and say that slavery was a positive good. Ugh, for them, financially, for the people it was perpetrated on, it was awful. Physically, mentally, 100%. It's not justifiable. It was the spirit behind the Know Nothing Party and the nativists, hating foreigners. It was the spirit of the Ku Klux Klan and the Only One Race Allowed Country Club. It was mean spirited. It was anti American. But it was there. Here was what Abraham Lincoln wrote in 1855. As a nation, we began by declaring that all men are created equal. We now practically read it, all men are created equal except Negroes. When the Know Nothings get control, it will read, all men are created equal except Negroes and foreigners and Catholics. When it comes to this, I shall prefer emigrating to some country where they make no pretending, of loving liberty. The imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in 1923 said, Negroes, Catholics, and Jews are the undesirable elements in America. The imperial wizard was a bigot, of course, he's leading the Klan. But some people listened to him. They didn't know their history. Maybe they hadn't read the famous letter George Washington wrote to Jews of Newport, Rhode Island. In it, he said, the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. Go ahead and answer this one on your own. You had plenty of examples in the preceding reading. I'm going to do the same, and then unpause and read forward. Anyway, in 1924, Congress passed a racist immigration bill. Its aim was to keep Asians, Jews, blacks, and people who can't speak English out of America. Anti-Semitism and xenophobia, which is anti-foreignism, which means against immigrants, had infected some Americans. But all Americans are descendants of immigrants, unless you're a Native American. Some of the people with the disease were in Congress, the State Department, and other government offices. Did they realize they were being un-American? Xenophobia, fear of foreigners, usually immigrants. That's what that means. There was a law in Arizona that was rejected. Name of Arizona law requiring it required people to show ID for no reason. But it was used to try to identify illegal immigrants in Arizona. This wasn't even when you were driving. But if you're not getting a ticket, see, as the ACLU is telling you, you're not required to show your ID generally. SB 1070. The Supreme Court decided that law was unreasonable. See, what is it, 1070? 1070. In Arizona, required showing ID without probable cause, and even if you weren't driving. It was later ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. By the way, there is a current laws about voting, like making illegal a vote that goes to the wrong precinct, or a vote that is turned in by someone that's not family. I don't know why those rules are created, but there's no good enough reason to deny the basic democratic process. So I expect the court to reject those laws, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, moving on. Many Americans are hospitable. That means welcoming. 85 newspapers wrote editorials urging Congress to pass a bill letting in those 20,000 children from Germany. It seems like the right thing to do. Citizens offered their homes to the young refugees. Leaders of church, labor, and social organizations spoke out, but not loudly enough. So, hmm. Oh, so 85 newspapers wrote editorials encouraging Congress at 20,000 German kids. Church, labor, and social groups tried to help too, but were ignored by Congress. The head of a powerful group, the American Coalition of Patriotic Societies, told Congress to protect the youth of America from this foreign invasion. He shouted the message of racist. There was fear in the world and a depression, and Congress listened. Does this have anything to do with you? Isn't anti Semitism a Jewish problem? No, it is a human problem. People who hate become hateful. A nation that allows bigotry and persecution is diminished by it. In 1939, the United States government gained sanction to bigotry and assistance to persecution. Those children were not allowed into the United States. All those kids. Hitler now knew that no one would rescue the children. They're not going to take care of the kids. Are they going to worry about anyone else? No. He felt free to build death camps. That is where most of those 20,000 children and a girl named Anne Frank, who you probably read about in middle school, ended their lives. Really had their lives stolen from them. So what happened to all those kids? 20,000 kids that people had homes for. Seeking safety U.S. or refused entry to the U.S. Did some digging and kind of found out why. Apparently, America was more worried with the Great Depression and jobs, and they were helping people, doing the right thing. obviously, I think they should have helped. And accepted refugees, plain Hitler's massacre will become known as the Holocaust. And we really didn't. And we actually needed people to work come World War II. So had we accepted those people, it would have helped us, but we didn't. In the name of science, that pseudoscience of race led to another science called eugenics. This is a bunch of nonsense, but listen to it. Eugenics is this fake, pseudo means fake, is this fake science where people are measuring skull size and says it's connected to intellect. We covered this during imperialism, but here it is, rearing its ugly head again. In other words, it says races should keep their blood pure by getting rid of problems. In the 1880s, Pennsylvania began sterilizing children who were said to be feeble minded. Sterilizing means they were unable to have children themselves. For men, it means a vasectomy. For women, it means tubal ligation, is my understanding. Indiana was the first state to pass a law forcing the sterilization of certain people who were thought undesirable. That usually meant the retarded. That was the accepted term at the time. That term is no longer accepted. Don't use that. Or criminals, or often boys and girls who were sexually active. Another 31 states followed with sterilization laws. In California, some 17,000 people were sterilized, most of them immigrants. They weren't dumb, they just didn't speak English. And they took their ability to reproduce away. It's terrible. You think that kind of thing would only happen in Nazi Germany, but now it's happening here. In Virginia, a 1924 sterilization law was challenged, taken to the U.S. Supreme Court, and upheld. What the heck's the court thinking? In that case, Buck v. Bell, Carrie Buck had been sterilized because she was said to be retarded. Recent evidence suggests that it was not even true. Like if you had a speech impediment, you could get labeled it like that. Or like even if you had vision issues. So it's really unfair. Nazis used Virginia's law as a model. That's right. Nazis used our laws to enforce their Nazi policies. That should be an embarrassment. They also used our Jim Crow laws as a model for their segregation of Jewish people. Under their Sterilization Act, thousands were made unable to have children. Guests or prisoners. After 1943, this is the middle column. Until wars end, no Jews enter the United States except for 874 guests of the president. That's it. How many of those million people could we have saved? At least 1 million, maybe half, 3 million, maybe all of them. I don't know. But I know we could have saved a heck of a lot more than 874. Anyway, 874 guests of the president who were denied visas, sent to an internment camp in Oswego, New York. I believe that's somewhere upstate, and kept behind barbed wire. This is someone being visited through barbed wire at Oswego, and told they would have to leave the country as soon as the war was over. Some had close relatives in the U.S. One refugee whose paralyzed wife lived on Long Island could not visit her even at holiday time. She's paralyzed, she didn't get around that well. More than 55,000 immigration quota spots for Eastern Europeans went unfilled in 1944. It's a lot of people that could have been helped. In the war years, about 100,000 German prisoners of war, mostly Nazi soldiers, were safe in the U.S. So we protected the perpetrators instead of helping the victims. That's god awful. So eugenics is a fake science supporting racism. In California, eugenics laws led to sterilization of 17,000 immigrants. 1943 and the end of the war, how many Jews entered the United States? 1943, sorry. 1943 to end of WW2. 843 Jews entered the U.S. Right? 843, 874. So I did check the number. Just forgot to change it. How were they treated? 874 were treated like prisoners, so-called as president and told they'd have to leave when war was over and not allowed to visit family. Over 55,000 immigrant spots filled in 1944. We don't have any further information, so we don't know how many total. So that'll be just fine. All right, last section. The St. Louis is turned back. See the little girl picture in this white box? That's Leanne Reef Lehrer, picture on the bottom left, in 1938 with her family. She was born in Vienna, Austria in 1934. These are her words about the St. Louis being turned back. I should have been a normal little girl, happy with my special doll, my big brother, thought me a noisy nuisance but loved me anyway, and my doting, that's loving, parents. But the world around me was going mad, and the life I should have had was not to be. Anne's father was a dentist, but the Nazis would not let him or other Jews work. One day he was found dead at the bottom of a stairwell. Did he commit suicide, or was he murdered? Leanne has never been quite sure. That's terrible. Do not know what really happened to your father. She was not yet 5 when her mother, her brother, and 934 other Jewish passengers set sail for Cuba from the port of Hamburg, Germany, on the luxury liner St. Louis. The passengers all had Cuban entry permits, and most had quota numbers that have let them into the United States eventually. But while they were at sea, Cuba changed its immigration policy. Most of the passengers were not allowed off the ship. After days of frantic, that's hurried and nervous negotiations, the St. Louis was forced to leave Cuba. The captain didn't want to take the Jewish passengers back to Germany. He knew what would happen to them there, so he headed for Miami. Telegrams were sent to President Roosevelt asking him to grant asylum to the refugees. The telegrams were not answered. They weren't answered? We should answer. How rude. A U.S. Coast Guard boat stayed close to the St. Louis to make sure no passengers jumped overboard and tried to swim ashore. Finally, the captain could do nothing, headed back to Europe, in early Anne's words again. My brother and I were among the passengers who survived, about a fourth of those on the ship, meaning only 200 and something lived after 934. We were sent back to Europe and given haven, that's safety in France, only to find the Nazis at our doorstep again a few months later. But somehow we managed to get to the U.S. in 1941. I was 7, a wide-eyed, bewildered girl greeted by New York children playing street games to wartime hate ditties. I remember a particularly popular one. Whistle while you work. Hitler is a jerk. Mussolini is a meanie. And the Japs are worse. It's like Whistle While You Work with Snow White and 70 Dwarfs, which came out in 1939 by Disney. Kids can be awful. That's an example of it. I tried to explain that some Germans were good and some bad. Kids can be awful at times. A lot of times kids can be great too. On more than one occasion, my non-groupie response earned me the wrath its hatred of the parents, who did not hesitate to suggest that I, quote, go back to where I came from. She went back there that she'd be killed. She's lucky to survive. Just because they disagree, that's what they said to her. Hurts even now when I remember the tone with which those words were delivered. I'm sure there was an angry snarl on the face, too. Dr. Leanne Reed Flair became a research scientist and then a consultant. She lives in Massachusetts and is writing a book that tells her story. So, in 2 sentences, summarize her story on the St. Louis. Having a detail or two would help. Then go ahead and submit this to Google Classroom. And that concludes this assignment.